Welcome to SarderTV. I'm Vaishali Jain. We have the pleasure of having Vijay Govindarajan with us today. Vijay is the Coxe Distinguished Professor at Dartmouth's Tuck School of Business, a Marvin Bower Fellow at Harvard Business School, and regarded as a leading expert in innovation and strategy. He's the author of many books and articles, including the New York Times bestseller, Reverse Innovation. And he's here to tell us about his latest book, The Three-Box Solution, A Strategy for Leading Innovation. Vijay, thank you so much for joining us today. So you've just come out with another book, The Three-Box Solution, A Strategy for Leading Innovation. Tell us about the central theme of the book.
You see, the main idea of the book is future is now. Future is not about what you have to do in the future. If you're a corporation, if you want to be a leader, say in the year 2020, it's not about what you have to do in the year 2020. It's about what you have to do today. And if future is now, then I tell companies that everything that they do, they should put in three boxes. How many of their activities are in box one, which is all about manage the present? It's about improve the efficiency of your current businesses. How many of your activities are in box two, which is about selectively forget the past? And how many of your activities are in box three, which is about create the future? Box one is competition for the present. It's all about efficiency. Box two, box three is competition for the future, which is all about innovation. And both are important. Therefore, leadership is about how do you create your future while managing the present. And the reason why this is a challenge is the principles that are involved to execute box one is very different than the principles that are involved in executing box two, box three. Yet today you have to do both, because to be a leader in the future, you have to allocate your resources and time across all the three boxes. This is the central strategic challenge that the book addresses.
Who is the target audience of your book?
Every manager in the company, because everybody in the organization has a role to play in all the three boxes. Of course, the chief executive officer has a role in balancing the three boxes, but change cannot be simply driven from the top. Change happens only if you cascade the message throughout the organization. Therefore, every manager has a role in creating the future while managing the present. Therefore, this book is really meant for managers at all levels, managers across all businesses, even managers in functional areas. Even a human resource department has to think about what are their box one projects, box two projects, and box three projects. Because you have to recruit talent not just only for today's business, you have to recruit talent also for the future.
Why should others buy this book?
I think this is such a fundamental issue for leaders, because ultimately every corporation wants to become competitive in the long term. And if you want to be a competitive organization, you have to balance today and tomorrow every day. So this is a fundamental core management challenge. And that is what this book, based on 35 years of research, writing, and consulting, I've written the book. Therefore, I say this is really the book managers have to read.
So can you provide us a simple framework on how to lead innovation?
You see, the simple framework for thinking about innovation is every organization need to think about how are they allocating their time and resources across three boxes. Box one, manage the present. Box two, selectively forget the past. Box three, create the future. What I have found working with companies is they way over focus on box one. While box one is terribly important, box two, box three is also equally important. Box one is about competition for the present. Box two, box three is about competition for the future. Therefore, the central leadership challenge is how do you create your future while managing the present? And this is easy to say, but not easy to do, because the thinking process and the execution methodologies you need in box one are very different than the thinking process and the execution methodologies you need in box two, box three. Yet today, you have to execute box 1 projects, but today you also have to execute box 2, box 3, targeted at that future. Yet there are inherent conflicts, inherent paradoxes, inherent tensions between the two. This is the central leadership challenge.
Can you share a case study with us to give us an example of this?
I think a good example would be Hasbro. If you say, look back at this company, say 20 years ago, Hasbro was essentially a product company. They were making toys, G.I. Joe, Mr. Potato Head. They were also in the traditional gaming space, Monopoly board game, Trivial Pursuits, Candyland, Scrabble. This was essentially a toys and games company participating in an industry called family entertainment. Now, think about what has happened in the last 20 years. In the last 20 years, that industry has gone through phenomenal changes. As an example, think about technologies. Think about how toys and games were produced in the mid-1990s versus how they are produced today. Gaming has migrated into so many technology platforms, electronic games, computer games, internet games, video games. The point is, if Hasbro has to have a disproportionate share and become a leader in technology-based gaming in the year 2016, the job does not begin in 2016. The job starts somewhere in the mid-1990s. They better start accumulating new capabilities. They better start tracking new set of competitors. They better start experimenting with new business models. But technology is not the only change. Again, think about customers. In 1995, toys and games were purchased only by kids who are 15 years and younger. But today, gaming has migrated to all age groups. Again, think about competition. In the mid-1990s, Hasbro had only one competitor, namely Mattel. It used to be G.I. Joe versus Barbie. But all of a sudden, their industry, there is a whole lot of competitors. Sony, Electronic Arts, Nintendo, so many players have come into that space. This is the central challenge that Hasbro has managed. That is why they are a great leader today. They have fundamentally reinvented themselves from a product company to a brand experience company. As an example, Transformers. Today you can experience as a product, as a toy, but also you can experience Transformers in a movie. You can experience Transformers in the theme park, Universal Studios. This is how they have fundamentally remade the company.
Your book outlines some of the processes that they went through in order to transform themselves. At a high level, can you talk about what some of those were?
I think the most fundamental process is trying to imagine the future. You see, nobody can predict the future. Now, when you can't predict the future, how do you become a leader in the year 2020 when you are, say, in the year 2016, when you can't predict what's going to happen in the year 2020? I say, while future cannot be predicted, it is very important for leaders to imagine the future. When I say imagine the future, what I mean is, what are your hypotheses about the future? And you formulate those hypotheses based on what I call weak signals. There are lots of weak signals. In box 1, you're responding to clear signals. In box 3, you're responding to weak signals. And based on weak signals, what are your hypotheses? As an example, if you go back to 1995, Hasbro, or for that matter, no company, could have predicted a company called Apple will introduce an iPhone in the year 2006, on which you can have many gaming applications. However, there were weak signals in the mid-1990s, which could have given you confidence to develop a hypothesis that technology-based gaming will be a humongous opportunity. What are those weak signals? Personal computer revolution has already happened. Atari introduced a video game, even in the late 70s. It may have been a clumsy game, it may have been an expensive game, but one thing we know in technology, the price of technology keeps dropping, the power of technology keeps increasing. Therefore, it is possible for Hasbro to formulate a hypothesis that technology-based gaming could be a humongous opportunity. So the key tool, I would say, in three-box balance is to formulate hypotheses about the future based on weak signals.
How do you identify weak signals?
I think the best way to identify weak signals is two ways. One, either you can use a free-for-all approach, which is in a digital platform, you pose a question. Say, how do we grow in emerging markets? And ask any employee in your organization to give you ideas, because weak signals can be absorbed by anybody in the organization. Free-for-all approach, you're really getting everybody's views. Another approach is a task force, where you put together a small task force, and here in the task force, you have to bring people who are maverick thinkers, who are out-of-the-box thinkers, and let them really think of crazy ideas. Because at this stage, you want to be divergent in your thinking. You want to have as many hypotheses as possible. I would say those are the two important tools.
What tools can we use to assess the business?
The main tool to assess the business is to ask the management team how much time are they spending in box one, how much time are they spending in box two, and how much time are they spending in box three, the management team. And I say the rough cut estimate for me is 40 to 60% in box one and 40 to 60% of your time in box two, box three. Then the management team can assess, do they have the right balance? I would say that's the most foundational way to assess the strength of your business.
And you would say Hasbro was able to do this well, starting way back when?
Because they have made this into a habit as part of their DNA, starting all the way from Brian Goldner, the CEO. He manages his own calendar in this way. And am I spending enough time today? Am I spending enough time in box two today? Am I spending enough time in box three today? So he kind of manages his calendar. Therefore, I would say Hasbro is a company, no company is perfect, but Hasbro has really strived very hard to really create change. The important thing in three-box solution is you must create the future yourself. The best way to predict the future is to create it yourself, because future can't be predicted. Therefore, the best way to predict the future is to create it yourself. And if you want to create your future, you have to imagine it first. If you can't imagine your future, there is nothing you will do today to create that future. And I think Hasbro is a good example.
How can organizations create the future?
You see, creating the future, box three, starts by identifying what are the nonlinear shifts that are going to happen in your industry. And identifying nonlinear shifts involves you have to observe the weak signals. And based on the weak signals, you observe what are the nonlinear shifts. A great example is Keurig. And the Keurig invention started with a weak signal, which is the coffee consumption in the US has been declining. And it's been declining quite strongly over time. And in the 80s, a company called Starbucks started, and so people were able to get a good cup of coffee in a Starbucks, but when they came back to the office, they still had to settle on the pot of coffee that was brewed, I don't know when, and it was sitting in the pot for you don't know how long. Within about 10 minutes, coffee loses its freshness. So people were getting frustrated that they could get this phenomenal coffee latte in Starbucks, but then for the rest of the day, they had to settle with this office coffee. So somebody saw that weak signal and said, why can't we have the same coffee experience in the office? And based on that weak signal, a whole nonlinear innovation, a box three innovation happened. So therefore, I say creating the future starts with weak signals.
Can you give us a little bit more detail around the process of how Keurig was able to do this successfully?
I think Keurig is a great example because Keurig was essentially a breakthrough box three business model, because what Keurig did was you make the coffee when you want to drink it. So it doesn't sit and its flavor and freshness gets lost. So you actually make the coffee when you need it. And Keurig created a brewer system which, for a customer, you don't see all the engineering complexity behind the brewer. It's such an easy, comfortable operation because when you make coffee, there are so many variables that make a good cup of coffee, which is how much of the coffee grind that you put, how much water do you add, what temperature you heat the coffee, etc. So when you actually make it yourself, you may add too much water, you may add too much coffee powder. Whereas Keurig system automates all of that, takes all the human judgments away. So you put one of those K cups, you make the Keurig coffee, it's fresh, you make it when you need it. It's clean, easy to do operation. That was the brilliant business model. And once you buy the Keurig brewer, then you are locked in to their K cups. So it's a kind of a razor and blades business model because they install the brewer in the office, then they get an annuity on the high margin K cups. The way Keurig executed this, so they wanted to test whether this kind of a product would actually be attractive. So therefore, even though the biggest market was the home market, because there are individual homes, there are millions and millions of homes. And if they can put a Keurig machine in every home, then obviously it's a humongous market. But that's just an assumption that individuals would want to put a Keurig machine in their kitchen. In order to test that assumption, what they did was they entered the office market. Office market was the low-cost experiment which proved to them that there is actually a bigger market that they can go after, which would be the at-home consumer market. And the office market didn't involve as much investment. It was a kind of a low-cost, low-risk experiment. What it also built was the brand name of Keurig, because if I'm working in a company and there is a Keurig machine there and I like it, then I say, you know what, I wouldn't mind having one at home. And of course, the price points have to be brought down, etc. But they learned a lot. That's a good example of placing a small bet first before placing a bigger bet. Creating the future is about nonlinear innovation. Box one also requires innovation, which is what I call linear innovation. Within your current business model, you continue to innovate. Box three is creating a new business model. That's what box three is. Going back to the Keurig example, Green Mountain Coffee Roasters is the one who created Keurig. Green Mountain Coffee Roasters, their box one business was coffee roasting. They roasted coffee and sold it in supermarkets. From coffee roasting, they went into hardware business because Keurig is a hardware. That's the nonlinear innovation. So box three is a nonlinear innovation, creating new business models.
How do organizations generate box three ideas?
The best way to generate box three ideas is to empower your mavericks. Because box three ideas cannot be generated just by the CEOs. Because if you think about who understands the weak signal the best, the people who are really in the fringes of the organization, who are closest to the customer, closest to the technology, closest to the competition, they are the ones who are seeing fundamental changes that are taking place in an organization. Say if you're a big three automotive company, and if you want to create box three business models in China, who understands the rate of change in the automotive industry in China? Not the CEO sitting in Detroit, but the so-called doers on the ground in China. So therefore, you really need to get these nonlinear ideas, the box three ideas, from the entire organization. Therefore, you must have a process by which you must empower every employee in your organization to step up to the plate and say, here is a box three idea. You collect all the box three ideas, then you can prune it down. But you have to empower everybody to help you with box three.
Talk a little bit about execution. How can an organization execute on those box 3 ideas?
I think the key in executing box 3 ideas is to understand box 3 is a bet on the future. Box 3 ideas are nothing but guesswork. That's what it is. Because it's based on weak signals. Weak signal can either be noise or real signal. That's why they're called weak signals. Therefore, the key is to understand that box 3 new business models is nothing but guesswork. Therefore, reduce the box 3 ideas to a series of hypotheses, series of assumptions, and then test the hypothesis. When you are testing hypothesis, what you are doing is you are converting assumptions into knowledge. And when you are converting assumptions into knowledge, the golden rule is spend a little, learn a lot, because there are a lot of assumptions to test. Keep the cost of failure cheap. Then you can fail more often. To me, failure is nothing more than converting assumptions into knowledge. Fail early, fail fast, fail cheap, so that you can galvanize behind a workable business model. So the key in executing box 3 is to understand you must conduct low-cost experiments.
How can organizations learn to forget the past?
To me, working with organizations, I have found box 2 is the biggest problem. And box 2 is about forgetting the past. And box 3 is about creating the future. If you can't forget, you can't create. Box 3 is about learning, and box 2 is about forgetting. And think about how many books we have written on learning organizations. We haven't written a single book on forgetting organizations. And forgetting is the biggest problem because when you become successful in box 1, it creates mindsets, behaviors, which get embedded in the organization, in their recruiting manuals, in their performance measures. Those mindsets are not helpful in box 3, yet they are helpful in box 1. Therefore, it becomes very, very difficult for organizations to forget. If we go back to Hasbro as an example, historically they were a product company. They were making Transformers as a toy. So when you move from a product company into a digital company, you have to forget that you make physical products and distribute it in Walmart. Yet the entire organization has made money by being a product company. And forgetting involves mindsets. Erasing organizational memory is very, very difficult. But unless you do that, you will not be successful as a digital company. So that's the forgetting challenge.
Can you share a case study with us?
I think a good example would be IBM, because if you think back historically, IBM was essentially a hardware company producing mainframes. They also went into personal computers. Yet there were two major nonlinear changes that began to threaten IBM. One was the personal computer revolution. Even though they participated in it, it took off on its own in a very major way. And the second is the internet. And IBM suddenly felt threatened by these two nonlinear shifts. And people inside the performance engine, the box 1, will always resist change. And they faced a significant forgetting issue, which is the box 1 performance engine had to forget their ways of doing it if they want to reinvent themselves on the internet. And therefore, what IBM did was to create a dedicated team which could work on these box 3. And the dedicated team was separate from the box 1 performance engine. As an example, one of the box 3 projects that they launched was pervasive computing. What this is IBM felt computing will migrate from personal computer to other devices. A good example today would be when you're driving your car on a toll booth, there is an easy pass that subtracts the toll from your electronic account. Now, this is an example of computing power that has gone beyond the personal computers to other devices. It could be home devices, it could be inside your automobile, easy pass, whatever. So IBM wanted to capture that opportunity in pervasive computing. That could never happen inside the mainframe, the hardware box one business. Therefore, they created a dedicated team which could work on pervasive computing. Therefore, they could forget the dominant logic of the performance engine. So the key is to create a dedicated team that is distinct and separate from the performance engine. If you can do that, then you can successfully forget.
How can leaders assess their organization's box 2 challenges?
If you really think about it, any organization which is extraordinarily successful in box 1, which promotes from within, where the top management has been with the company for a long time, where the top management has worked in the same industry, these would be, to me, immediate red flags that this company will have a significant forgetting problem. Because the more successful you are in box 1, more there is a tendency to preserve. Why? Because when you're successful in box 1, what happens is you only recruit competencies, talent, to make you even better in box 1. Whereas box 3 requires different competencies, different talent. Similarly, when you're so successful in box 1, you're also afraid of cannibalization. Because if you're Hasbro, if you're a product company, want to move into digital company, the digital businesses threaten your physical product. Therefore, you are afraid of cannibalization. This is happening today in publishing industry. If you're a New York Times newspaper and you want to reinvent yourself on the digital medium and create a New York Times digital, that could potentially cannibalize the newspaper business. So part of it is cannibalization threat, part of it is notion of you're only building competencies when you're successful in box 1 to further succeed in box 1. That is why I say creating a dedicated team is important. That is the way to assess the nature of your forgetting challenge.
So then how can you hire beyond box 1? What are some strategies for that?
I think when you set up a dedicated team, say going back to the IBM example for pervasive computing, then you ask yourself the question, what are the talent that's needed to succeed in that business? Then that opens up a whole way of thinking about how do you hire the talent. If you go back to the Hasbro example, they set up a separate team for digital gaming. Now, then you ask the question, what would it take to succeed in digital gaming? The people who are going to be successful in analog gaming cannot create digital gaming. Then you recruit the people with software expertise, etc.
How can leaders identify their organization's box 2 beliefs?
I think the key here is to go back to what are the keys to success in your box 1 performance engine. That is what would be the beliefs that you have to get away from. Because if you take another example like Microsoft historical success was Windows-powered PCs. That success creates a set of beliefs inside Microsoft. When the computing platform migrates to mobile, they are PC-based. Now, suddenly, that discontinuity creates a humongous challenge for Microsoft because the beliefs that they have is rooted in the success in the performance engine. Therefore, the best way to understand the box 2 beliefs is to go back to what makes you successful in box 1. And some of those beliefs are not needed for box 3.
So talk a little bit about how organizations can manage the present and manage the business at its peak profitability.
See, box 1 is your performance engine. And if the performance engine is not functioning properly, box 2, box 3 doesn't matter because box 1 is the foundation. Therefore, I say it's very, very important for organizations to make sure that their box 1 performance engine is solid because that is what gives you the cash flow that you can invest for the future.
Can you share a case study with us?
I think the good example here would be United Rentals. This is a largest equipment rental company. What happened was, if you think back, in year 2008 and 2009, Great Recession, that really affects the construction industry. And they were essentially supplying rental equipment to the construction industry. This will be like a bulldozer and things like that. And when the construction industry goes south, obviously the profitability of United Rentals is depressed. Added to that, in the year 2007, there was a private equity company which wanted to buy United Rentals. And the deal was almost going to be signed. Therefore, the founder CEO stepped aside, and even 3 or 4 of the board members stepped aside, assuming that this deal was going to go through. But the deal fell through. With the result, they didn't have a CEO, they didn't have a couple of board members, and all of a sudden, you have this great recession knocking you down. And whenever a company is in the process of sale, they don't think about the future, they don't think about anything. The whole organization really is in a transition mode to the new management. Everything changed when the deal fell through and the Great Recession hit, and their Box One business was decimated. And their share price, which was about $35, dropped all the way to $2. Is a crisis. So the first order of business for a company like that is not to think about Box 2, Box 3. You got to fix Box 1 first. So the new CEO who came in place essentially redrew the strategy and focused more on national accounts as compared to local customers, because this company grew through acquisition. So essentially they acquired a lot of local rental equipment companies, which were all supplying equipment to a local customer. So they said the way to really succeed is to go after national customers. When you go after national customers, you can better balance recession. And if you want to go after national customers, then you have to change the reward system, because you can't evaluate and reward the branch managers only on the profitability of that branch. Then they will not share their equipment with other branches. When it is a national customer, you need these local units to collaborate. So they changed the reward system. Similarly, another part of their strategy is to move away from the construction industry. Of course, construction will be still a significant part, but add other customers, industrial customers, who could do some counter-cyclical kind of, so that in the future, if there is a recession in construction, some other industry goes up. So in Box 1, when you want to achieve peak performance, is to get your strategy right, then put the incentives, organizational structure, people aligned with that strategy. And that's what United Rentals did. And within about 5 years, their stock price went to almost $100. And that's the kind of payoff you have when you focus on Box 1. And once the Box 1 is steady, then you can start thinking about Box 2, Box 3.
How do you assess the health of your organization's Box 1?
I think the key in Box 1 is really look at the bottom line. Because in Box 3, you can't look at the bottom line. In Box 1, it's bottom line. So if the profitability is going down, compare your profitability to industry profitability, your share price to other people in your industry. That's the easiest benchmark to know whether your Box 1 is performing at the peak efficiency or not.
How can organizations strengthen their Box 1?
I think the key in strengthening Box 1 is to get clarity on strategy first, and then design structures and systems and incentives which will fit that strategy. By the way, this is completely different in Box 3, because you can't get your strategy clear in Box 3 because Box 3 is guesswork. In Box 3, by testing assumptions, strategy comes out at the end as an output. Whereas in Box 1, you start with strategy first. Then you align the systems to that strategy. So the key is to get the strategy right in Box 1 and then align systems and structures and incentives.
Tell us about an organization that has successfully applied the three-box model.
One of the best examples would be Mahindra and Mahindra. And this is an Indian conglomerate, which frankly I thought in 1993, when the Indian economy opened up, this would be one of the companies which will die. Because historically they made agricultural tractors, and when the Indian economy was closed economy before 1993, you could be inefficient because you can simply pass on your cost to the customer because customer is waiting in line to buy your product. In 1993, when they opened up the economy, that means world-class players will come into India, like John Deere, which is a number one tractor manufacturer, could come into India. And I thought Mahindra being so weak will go out of business. And here is a great example of Anand Mahindra, a great leader who really exemplifies three-box balance to me, how he has completely reinvented that company. And in tractors, they are number one in the world today in terms of units sold, even bigger than John Deere. So he has completely made them very strong in tractors. He's reinvented Mahindra where they are also a significant player in the automotive market. They had no competency in making automobiles before, yet they have totally indigenously designed SUV called Scorpio, which is a phenomenal success in India. A third, he has taken Mahindra, an Indian company, and made them into a global powerhouse, making the global companies. Therefore, it's a great example of three-box balance.
There's another example that you give also of Tata Consulting. They've also achieved the three-box balance. Can you talk a little bit about how they've done it?
I think Tata Consulting is another great example because historically, in the IT outsourcing business model used to be that the Indian software engineers will be sent to the US for 6 months to work with a company in the US. Say General Electric wants a software written, they will send the Indian software engineers to the US because the Indian software engineers are lower cost. They will work on the General Electric site in the US and finish the project. The brilliant breakthrough Tata Consulting came with the global service delivery model, which is essentially do only 10% of the work closer to the customer and do 90% of the work in India. So the Indian engineers won't need to be sent to the US anymore. Essentially, you study what General Electric needs. You send maybe a few people to understand the customer needs, but do all the work in India. With the result, they can dramatically bring down the cost, dramatically improve quality, because you have access to the entire talent pool in India. Brilliant box 3 move. Then Tata Consulting has reinvented itself in cloud computing, in social network, in mobile. So it's an example of a company which is continuously excelling in all the 3 boxes.
How can you assess the three-box balance in your organization?
I think the best way to do it is to ask the management team how much time are they spending in box 1, how much time in box 2, and how much time in box 3. And invariably what you're going to find is they overspend on box 1. Then you ask them the question, what is preventing them from spending more time in box 2, box 3? And list all the barriers. Then you can think about how do we break loose from those barriers. That's the 3-step process I would recommend.
And how do you balance the 3 boxes in your organization?
I think the key to balancing the 3 boxes is to practice 3 simple principles. Principle number 1 is when you are allocating resources, allocate resources separately for box 3 projects from box 1. So you must keep a separate pool of resources, which is only available for box 3. And then pool of resources separately for box 1. That's principle number 1. Principle number 2 is create a dedicated team for box 3. And the dedicated team should be distinct and separate from the box 1 performance engine. Principle number 3, evaluate the box 1 business on short-term financial results, but evaluate the box 3 not on short-term financial results, because they can't give you short-term financial results, but evaluate them on their ability to test assumptions. Can they conduct low-cost experiments to test assumptions? If you follow these three simple principles, then you can maintain the three-box balance.
So then when times are tough, do you find that organizations too readily pare down or get rid of box 3 resources or teams?
Without a question. That is why I say ring fence the resources that you allocate for box 3. It cannot be redirected to box 1, because the tendency would be to get it back into box 1. So I say put some resources and say this is only available for box 3. Cannot be touched. It's almost like a venture capital inside your company. That discipline is what will help you to resist the temptation of redirecting those resources for box 1.
What types of leadership behaviors contribute to achieving the balance in all three boxes in the box 3 solution?
I think leadership behavior is at the heart of this. And I would say three very important leadership behaviors. First, leader has to be ambidextrous. An ambidextrous leader is one who can operate with the right hand and the left hand equally effectively. They can write with the right hand, they can write with the left hand. This is the leader who can operate a microscope, which is box 1, and a telescope, which is box 3, with equal fluidity. Therefore, first important principle is leaders must be able to focus simultaneously on short term and long term. That's principle number 1. Second is they must cultivate tolerance for mavericks. It's very important for leaders to understand that mavericks can be a source of strength for the organization. Mavericks have two qualities. First, they come up with crazy ideas. Second, they are organizational nightmares. They can't get along with anybody. So they get easily rejected by the organization. So as a leader, you have to, of course, you don't want people who are just rabble-rousers, but you have to spot that brilliance who is a loner, who can't get along with people. So understand and cultivate mavericks. That's second principle. Third is you must accept and tolerate failure. You must create a culture where risk-taking is rewarded, failure is rewarded. Of course, you have to make a distinction between failure and mistakes. You don't want to tolerate mistakes. Failure to me is about conducting a low-cost experiment, converting assumptions into knowledge. That kind of failure you must encourage. If you do these three leadership behaviors, and you need to practice that up and down in the organization, it's not just the CEOs, leadership alone. We are talking about leadership at all levels. Have to practice these three, because mavericks can be in any part of the organization. So any leader should be able to spot and empower mavericks. Every leader should think about short-term and long-term. If you're managing human resource function, you must wear a hat and say, how am I going to recruit talent for today and tomorrow? And every leader should think about, how do I encourage risk-taking? How do I reward failures?
Can you share a case study with us?
I think the case study is, I would go back to the Mahindra, because Anand Mahindra represents, in my mind, these three behaviors. First of all, he is an ambidextrous leader, and he is so comfortable in dealing with short-term and long-term. Because when he took over in 1993, when the Indian economy liberalized, the first order of business was the company was so inefficient, he had to fix the box 1 performance engine. So he was razor sharp, focused on box 1. But he knew that if he continued that focus forever, the company will go under. Therefore, quickly, once the box 1 became solid, he began to focus on box 2, box 3, encourage this organization to invent this SUV Scorpio. Second, tolerating mavericks. In fact, the Scorpio SUV came as a result. He was having a plant tour and visiting one of the plants, and one of the 26-year-old design school graduate who has never designed an automobile just showed him a sketch of what would ultimately become a Scorpio SUV. He said, I got a sketch of a car that we can make. And he looked at that sketch. It looked like a genius idea. And then the boss of this person told him, this guy can't get along with anybody. The moment he said he can't get along with anybody, and then he saw the sketch, he said, this is the kind of person I want to empower, which led to this phenomenal success. Third is tolerating failure. He essentially has made it a rule that taking risk is a badge of honor. Low-cost experiment is something we should encourage. And the SUV Scorpio was a $120 million bet, which is a very big bet for Mahindra. But what he then told them, before you incur the $120 million, let's figure out whether we actually can design an SUV. An SUV would be something that the Indian market would want. So therefore, he asked the organization to take, you see, historically they made Jeeps. Mahindra made Jeeps, but the Jeep, they just borrowed the technology from others. They just assembled the Jeep in India. He took one of the Jeeps and said, spending $5 million on this Jeep, soup it up into an SUV and let's put it on the roads and see how the customer likes it. And the $5 million experiment taught them many things about how to design an SUV. And then, therefore, that small bet gave them the confidence to take on the bigger bet later on. So he embodies all the three principles.
You also had spoken about working at GE and the leaders there who exhibit some of these behaviors. Can you give us an example of that?
I think General Electric is another great example, because if you think of GE, it's a 136-year-old company. If you're a 136-year-old company, you got to be able to balance the three boxes. If you don't, you're not going to survive for that long. And their history is full of examples of where they have excelled in innovation and efficiency. But the current leadership under Jeff Immelt is a great example of a three-box balance exemplar. And think about, in box one, he has focused on performance. In box two, since he became CEO, how many businesses he has divested? That's all box two. Box two is about divesting businesses which doesn't fit your future. That doesn't mean these are bad businesses. So he sold insurance. He sold NBC Universal. More recently, he sold finance businesses. Box two. In box three, the Internet of Things is his current box three push, which is, GE is a hardware company. You think about their energy business. They make gasoline turbine engines. You think of their healthcare business. They make X-ray machines. They make CAT scanners. They make MR machines, ultrasounds. You think of their transportation business. They make, again, hardware. You think of their aircraft business. They make, again, hardware, aircraft engines. So they're essentially making trains, aircraft engines, gasoline turbines, in medical imaging equipment. What he said was, we need to create a box tree, which is a software business, an Internet of Things. And he created a dedicated team in Silicon Valley and recruited thousands of software engineers, because box three cannot happen inside box one. The performance engine cannot forget the old ways of doing things. So he created a dedicated team, but the dedicated team could benefit from the box one performance engine, because the aircraft engine is generating so much data. That's what the Internet of Things can exploit. Similarly, the medical imaging equipment, your MR machine, CT scanner, produces so much of data, which a pure Silicon Valley startup doesn't have that kind of data. Whereas his Internet of Things dedicated team can really leverage what GE has. That is why GE has done a phenomenal job in reinventing itself as a digital business, in addition to a physical product hardware business. So GE is a great example of three-box balance.
Tell us about a leader who has successfully imbibed all of these leadership behaviors.
I think I would put three leaders. Brian Goldner from Hasbro, Anand Mahindra, Jeff Immelt in GE. I think all three leaders, in my mind, are ones who comfortably manage microscope and telescope, box 1 and box 3. And that's what leadership is all about. Ultimately, it's about managing the paradox of thinking long term and focusing on the short term, and doing it meaningfully, efficiently, in a robust way. I think these are great leaders that we can learn from.
And your previous book, Reverse Innovation, was a New York Times bestseller. Tell us about the concept of reverse innovation.
See, reverse innovation essentially is historically companies innovated in a rich country like the US and sold those products in a poor country like India. Reverse innovation is doing exactly the opposite. It's about innovating in a poor country like India and selling those products in a rich country like the US. Reverse innovation is an example of a box 3 innovation. Because what happens? Why do you need to innovate in India? Take, for instance, General Electric healthcare. For instance, in the US, they make a $20,000 electrocardiogram machine, ECG machine, which is a first point of diagnosis for heart attack. Now, they sell the $20,000 ECG machine even in India to the top 10% of the economic pyramid. But the remaining 90% of India are non-consumers of the $20,000 machine. Why? Simple fact is affordability. They can't afford that machine. But that 90% of non-consumers also suffer from heart attack. Just like the way the 10% rich folks suffer from heart attack. This is my main point. Non-consumers have exactly the same problem as consumers. The reason they are non-consumers is they can't consume the products you are giving to the consumers. If they can consume it, they would have already become consumers. Therefore, if you can do breakthrough innovation, if you can do nonlinear innovation, if you can do box 3 innovation, you can convert these non-consumers into consumers. And in fact, one of the first projects that I got involved in GE is to innovate a $500 ECG machine for India, the non-consumers. And the $500 ECG machine is battery operated, it's affordable, easy to operate. So this is one of those machines which has opened up a huge market for GE by converting a whole lot of non-consumers in India into consumers. But the real bonus is that machine is also now sold in 90 countries. That's the reverse innovation part. Because when you innovate in emerging markets, it can also transform the life of people in rich countries. And reverse innovation is an example of a box 3 innovation.
Well, Vijay, this was great. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Yeah.
And we'll see you next time on SarderTV.